Have you ever felt like you're failing at your health? Like, no matter what you do, it's never enough? For so many of us, health becomes this cycle of guilt and shame where food feels like a form of control and self-care feels like a form of punishment. But what if the way back down wasn't more discipline, but rather love? Today, our guest is Ocean Robbins, CEO of the Food Revolution Network, and son of the late Diet for a New America author, John Robbins. Ocean has carried forward that powerful legacy through purpose, through grief, and forged his own path rooted in healing and compassion. In today's conversation, we explore what it means to let go of shame, reclaim joy, and let love guide how we eat, move, and live. And I'm so excited that my co-host Poe is back for this one. So let's do the show. Ocean, so many people feel like they're failing at health. I'm sure you see that a lot in the people you work with. Like, they look at health like it's a punishment for not being good enough. And there's feelings of guilt and shame and self-judgment that really become the backdrop of their journey. And so I'm wondering, why do you think that's such a common experience? And how might we begin to unburden ourselves from it?
Well, the thing to remember is that we're all mortal. And, ultimately, life is a terminal condition. Like, we're literally all going to die. And things will break down at one pace or another, in one way or another, but it's kind of the law of the universe, right? And so there are practices we can undertake. There are things we can do to maximize our vitality, our peace, our joy, our wellness while we're on earth. But if we think that the measure of the success of a life is that it goes on forever, then literally every single life ends in failure and defeat. So I think we need a larger context. I think the Serenity Prayer says it so well. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So we've got to ask for that wisdom. And there are places where serenity is the name of the game. Like you got to learn to accept the way the world is, because arguing with God or creator or life, whatever you hold it, that the world should be different, doesn't change anything. It just makes your journey more miserable. There's the old saying from Nietzsche, she who will, the fates lead. She who won't, they drag. We are on we have a date with destiny, our own destiny, if you will. And we're on that path inexorably. Now, along the way, we can either get with the program and bring as much peace, joy, and aliveness as we can to it, as much clarity and integrity and purpose to it as we can, or we can kick, scream, fight, bemoan, or we can go lethargic and try to ignore reality. But my interest is helping us to have that courage to implement all the changes that we can that will make life better and more fulfilling. And I honestly think one of the things I want to change is all the places in me that are not at peace with what is, right? Because I want to accept everything that is, including my outrage, my horror, my grief, and some of the things that are, right? That's okay too. And so that to me is the greater acceptance that I strive for. And when we suffer, when we're in pain, when we're dying, like a lot of us think, what did I do wrong? Is it the GMOs? I had a bite of something with glyphosate 3 years ago. Is it the negative thoughts? I never got over my anger at my mom. Is it, what did I do wrong? Right. And I don't think that is an inherently helpful question. I think the questions we ask ourselves shape the answers we get and the lives we live. And so questions that start with why, or that assume guilt, or that create shame or blame, are not inherently empowering or useful. What is interesting is, what can I do now to create the most meaningful, fulfilling life possible? And sometimes that means making the choices that help us have more vitality and more peace. And one of the things I love about so-called complementary or alternative medicine is that at its best, or lifestyle medicine, at its best, it's helping us do things that make things better regardless of medical outcome. For example, we know that having more love in our lives or having less stress is good for health outcome. It increases longevity. It brings down cholesterol levels. It's good for everything in our medical portfolio, but it also makes us happier people that are more fulfilled. And if you think the purpose of life is just about love, then check, we got that covered when we nurture more loving relationships with life, with each other, and with ourselves and our creator. So to me, those are profound principles. And I'm interested in doing the things that help me, yes, live longer according to medical studies, but that also help me feel more alive and more whole and more at peace. And I don't think that shame or blame or self-criticism or guilt ever made the world better. Now there are places, of course, when we want to push ourselves. We want to be honest with ourselves. We want to challenge ourselves. So, honest self-talk, honest reckoning with the impact of choices, accountability. These are important principles in life, but that's very different from the kind of shame or blame that actually causes parts of us to go into retreat or hiding, feel worse, and end up making more addictive, more destructive choices instead of healthy and empowering ones.
Yeah, like I hear what you're saying. Like you can talk to yourself in a self-critical and sort of judgmental way, or you can also look at yourself objectively in a loving way.
Yeah.
And that's what I think what you're getting at is like, how do we make that shift?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I'm not saying that we need to just naively say, oh, I'm all good. I'll just keep, drinking myself to death and not face reality that I'm killing myself. If you're smoking a couple of packs of cigarettes a day, there's consequences for your actions that you're gonna pay that price, and so will your loved ones. So we've got to face reality, but that's focused on what can I do and how can I live in more congruency with my values and my life, rather than shame, blame, negativity that tends to beget more pain, but not better choices.
Right. So Ocean, I just had a question. Like, when did you have this interest? Like, at what point in your life is it something that you've always had from when you were young, or was it something that you've kind of developed over your life?
I've been asking big questions, honestly, my whole life. I grew up in a family that was pretty unusual. I was born in a one-room log cabin in the middle of the woods to parents who were practicing yoga and meditation for several hours a day and naming their kid Ocean. And they almost named me Kale, way before Kale was cool. So, my dad was telling me about factory farms, about the nuclear threat, that we lived under a nuclear shadow that could annihilate all life on Earth. At the age of 6, 7 years old, I organized a peace rally in my elementary school in second grade, so I was pretty passionate about doing what I could to make things better in the world from an early age. And that's just kind of how I was raised and how I was shaped, I guess. But I think over the years, I've also had some of my sort of stridency tempered a bit. I was a bit of a fundamentalist in some respects, especially around food. I was a vegetarian, and I, in second grade, I was going through the schoolyard, interrogating my friends on the contents of their lunch boxes, and asking my best friend Damien if he believed in the death penalty for murder, and then making sure he was aware that his roast beef sandwich was the product of the murder of a living mammal. And by the end of that conversation, his roast beef sandwich was in the garbage. We'd gotten in a fist fight, and I was in the principal's office. And I had to think long and hard about my supposed passion for peace and nonviolence while I was getting in a fist fight with my best friend over his lunch. So I think I've learned a little bit about sovereignty, about respect for people's choices, and also my own father passed away in June of 2025, and he was a picture of health and vitality. He made incredible choices. He also had polio as a child, and largely recovered, but then post-polio syndrome came in late in life, and he kicked his behind, and watching this magnificent pillar of health deteriorate at the very end and suffer and then transition, it really was such a stark reminder that we can do all the right things and we're still going to die, and I absolutely believe that his healthy choices gave him, 75 healthy years, that enabled him to run marathons and be a triathlete and climb mountains with me and and live an incredible life. But his time still came, and that's going to be true for all of us sooner or later. So then I think that the goal of life isn't eternal life. It's really living while we're here, At least that's how I hold it now.
Ocean, when your dad sort of developed the final diagnosis and you knew the end was coming, was that something, I imagine that was really, you talk about acceptance and accepting what is, but I imagine that would be such a hard thing to accept.
It was really hard to accept. And there were moments when I was particularly mad that he was accepting it, to be honest with you. And I now think that was one of his greatest gifts to me, because he really made peace with death towards the end. I mean, for the last couple years of his life, it's like he knew it was coming, and he probably talked about it with me every time I saw him, like talked about death and mortality and deterioration, and how he was learning to make peace with all of the sensations. He was in chronic pain towards the end, and yet he chose not to be on narcotics through the day, because he wanted to have his consciousness present. He didn't want to be numbed out to the extent that he couldn't actually have coherent, meaningful conversations in his right mind. And he felt like he still had some work to do, to clean up, to apologize for some things, to make amends for some things, to complete some things. And he wanted to be present for that, and there's something about, I think we all think we're going to live forever until the moment when we realize that, oh my God, it's not just theoretical. I'm really going to die, and once that really hit him, I felt like he stopped fighting it at a certain point, and he started really looking at serenity and peace in the midst of it. And I was kind of mad about that, to be honest with you. I was like, no, you could still fight this. Like, and he tried all kinds of things. I mean, he got a $25,000 hyperbaric oxygen chamber to install at home and give himself daily treatments because he read some studies showing it was helpful. I mean, it's not like he was giving up, but he was also like, there was a peace and acceptance that was increasingly present. And I learned a lot from that,
Sure.
I think that the reality of that we're all going to die is really present for me now. And I don't just mean us personally. I mean, everything we love, everything we care about, everything we build, is going to end at some point. Or every company, every organization, every religion, even, every person. And when we really recognize that reality, then I think it gives a different perspective on what we're doing here on Earth, because I don't think then that we're just here to build our reputation. Obviously, when we die, we don't take money with us. We don't take reputation with us. We don't take our physical health or lack of it with us. We don't take our life traumas with us, I don't think. But I do believe that something persists, and this is just my belief, so take it for what you will. But my experience has been that that when my dad died, I felt like a part of me went over with him a little bit, and I got a little glimpse maybe of something. And I felt that we do take love with us, the love we've given and shared, and maybe we take karma with us. We take the sum impact of our actions, and that has an impact. And I also don't think that when we die, that's all over. Like, I've had the sense that my dad is still trying to help from over there, if you will, in some way, that he's trying to help his family, his loved ones, be a force for good in some way, and also clean up harm that he did along the way. And that, I don't believe that every soul does that necessarily, but that's been my experience of my dad. And it's a beautiful feeling to feel like I've got an ally over there, I don't know that it's there exactly, but it feels like it's on the other side of the veil. And here's something else fascinating. I hope you don't mind me getting a little metaphysical here, but I was looking up at the stars the other night, and I suddenly had this realization that every single day we're boxed into this experience that the Earth is all there is. Like, we look up at the sky, and that's the sky, and that's it. And then at night, the veil opens up, and we realize we are part of a universe. And I wonder if while we're on Earth, while we're alive in these bodies, it isn't a little bit like living at daytime on Earth. And I wonder if death, or even maybe sometimes our dreams, open us to another dimension of consciousness where we realize we're part of a much, much bigger universe, that so-called life isn't all there is, that this Earth isn't all there is, and that there's more. And from that perspective, maybe our lives take on a bit of a different meaning.
Just processing that, man.
One thing I hear over and over, you often make references, and it's a part of your beliefs, I believe, are Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism. You mentioned karma. I hear you. Was that very much a part of your upbringing? Like, were your parents rooted in those traditions as well?
Yeah, my parents were, they were practicing yoga and meditation a lot, and they had a pretty strong relationship, especially I would say to Eastern traditions, Hinduism probably most prominently, but also layers of Buddhism. My family was Jewish. Like we were a bit of a hodgepodge, like a lot of people are. My dad used to say that he was deist. He believed in God, but he said there's one light and there's many lamps. And, that's always stuck with me. Like, I think that, I'm very interested in, I consider myself a deeply faith-based and spiritual person. But for me personally, there's not one religious tradition that anchors in. I respect people who have a religion. Absolutely. I think that can be beautiful. It's just that for me and my path, I'm a bit of a mutt.
No, I was just going to ask about, that experience that you shared about what you learned from your father in terms of him passing. How has that affected you in your daily life? Like, how has that shifted your decision making moving forward, knowing that the end, we all have it coming. Everybody has it coming. Everything has it coming.
Well, it's become apparent to me that that we live much of our lives on autopilot. And when we're on autopilot, we're not really living. We're not really learning. We're not really growing. And of course, a brain has limited energy and it needs to do a lot on autopilot. I mean, we learned to speak once and now we use words fluidly with neural pathways that were hard earned and constructed over the course of years, And so, neural pathways are critical. Autopilot has its place. But it also seems to me that we experience only a tiny, tiny, minuscule slice of a fraction of what's actually happening in any given moment. Like right now in your body, there are millions of chemical reactions taking place in every second, right? And most of them occur completely unconsciously, right? And similarly, there are sensations, there are feedback loops in our bodies, in our psyches, in our consciousness, most of which we tune out. And the ability to tune out is critical so you can focus on what you choose to focus on. But I have become aware that within some of those feedback loops, there's profound wisdom. So I'm getting curious more about body sensations and what they tell me about feelings and what that tells me about consciousness and choices that I'm making. If there's a little feeling in my gut that feels queasy about something, I pause and listen more. I feel like since my dad passed, I'm going slower in life. I'm much more interested in measuring 3 times and cutting once. And I used to think that my value, my self-esteem in some way were tied to how much I could accomplish in a day, or even in an hour, how much I could blast through things and check things off the to-do list and get things done. And I was fairly ambitious in those ways. And I feel like I've slowed down a lot and I'm a lot more reflective on impact, on integrity, on choices, on values, and holding contradictions, if you will. Like I'm a person who values integrity and moral fiber and conscience a great deal. And yet there are political dynamics today in the world on which I've remained quite silent because I want to be true to my larger mission of changing the way the world eats. And I don't want to create enemies. I don't want to, antagonize. I don't want to inflame. And, a sharp knife cuts best, which means it's focused and clear and pointed. And my mission is healthy, ethical, sustainable food for all. But at another level, I'm bigger than that. I'm not just a food person. And yet I notice the contradictions. I care deeply about suffering, about pain, about loss, about violence. And yet I'm focused on food because that's where I think I can make the biggest impact. And there's contradictions there, I'm somebody who cares about other humans, and yet I don't give away all my money to everybody who hurts and needs. And sometimes it's painful to think that I have more than somebody and I'm not helping somebody who's dying right now. of hunger. And those realities sometimes hit us in the face. And I question, like, why? Why do I value, my accumulation of more than I need over somebody else's basic survival? And yet, of course, if we all gave away every penny we had every day, where would we be, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first, they say, before helping others. So to me, these are contradictions of being human in the world. And I'm a little more slow to think about them and be with them rather than just brushing past to think I've got my way of solving the problem and I'm just moving it. And I'm a CEO of a company, Food Revolution Network. I started it with my dad, and we're trying to change the way the world eats. And there are so many business decisions to make every day. And I feel like I'm slowing down to think about, like, what does it mean to be rooted in service as a primary core value? And how does that interface with the need to pay 18 staff, and to keep the lights on and the business side of things functioning? And sometimes those are completely congruent. When you do good work, people respond and they purchase and things move forward. But sometimes they're not completely congruent. We could send another sales promotion, or we could send more valuable content that helps change people's lives. And I actually think the second thing might do more good for people, but the first one would bring in more money, and we got to pay the bills. And those are complexities that we hold. And I'm letting myself just feel those complexities without needing to rush to a quick answer and brush on past. And that feels really important because, I think we all need to ask bigger questions.
So much of what you give so much. I mean, so much, like this, the annual summit you do, like you just give that away. Like so much of what you do is just, is that you're just giving that away. And then I hear there's this, not tension, but like realistic need to pay the bills and pay your staff. And so you're sort of like struggling, or not struggling, but, balancing those two things constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all live in that way. Like I look at purchasing choices as one microcosm, okay? Like, recently my wife and I were buying blueberries at the store, and the organic ones cost twice as much. And I was like, okay, that is too much. I'm not paying $7 for a little 6-ounce package of blueberries, right? But I would pay $3.50. And I know that blueberries are healthy. And then my wife looks at me and says, but you know that blueberries are highly contaminated with pesticides, and farm worker treatment is important. And if we don't buy organics, who will? Like, with all that our family knows about this. And she grabbed the organic blueberries. And I was like, but that's too much money to spend for 6 ounces of blueberries. So my values of frugality were rubbing up against my values of, social impact and conscience and right livelihood. And it was a complicated moment. And I don't know how to answer that, except that we've each got to decide what makes sense. And ultimately, I mostly eat frozen organic blueberries, because you kind of get a little price break, and try to get them on sale, but like, these are complicated things sometimes that we all wrestle with. And depending on our financial status and our context, we make those choices differently. And I just think that we tend to get a little dogmatic in this world and think that there's a right and a wrong and a good and a bad and a black and a white. And we miss that there is nuance. And, our political leaders are so focused on, like, everything they say is right and everything the other team does is bad. And we lose some of that nuance, right? That there are pros and cons to every choice. And I'm not saying we need to get, analysis paralysis. Like, sometimes you just got to decide and move on. But I am saying that being willing to have our hearts open to feel impact is important. So we have those feedback loops. So we keep assessing, is this helping me be more alive or less alive, more congruent with my integrity and values or less? Is this bringing more love into my life or less? Is my heart bigger or smaller in relation to this choice? When I was a kid, my dad used to, when he was feeling stressed about money, he told me once, whenever I feel really stressed about money, I give money away to somebody who has less than me. And, it might be $10, to a homeless person or whatever. But he said, and that changes my psychology from a place of scarcity to a place of abundance. And I actually believe that I'm better able to earn money when I'm in that state of consciousness. And he said, but I don't do it for that reason. I do it because I want to get out of fear and into love. And I heard that, and, it was a profound lesson for me. And I look at that still to this day in so many ways where when we move from fear into love, our world gets brighter and better. And here's another example, super personal. My wife and I, sometimes we've been together 31 years. Sometimes we have conflict, right? Hello, surprise, surprise. And when we are sometimes in conflict, we have this practice we do where we'll pause and we'll say, let's both appreciate three things about each other. We don't just do this in moments of conflict, by the way. We do this almost every day, but it's particularly potent in a moment of conflict. And we each just say three things. And the first one might be pretty lame, like, thanks for doing the dishes today for once, or whatever, like, because we're mad, but then, or thanks for doing 3 dishes. I noticed that, whatever it is. But then it's interesting when you're appreciated, your heart softens and suddenly it's easier to appreciate. And by the third one, we're getting pretty deep and real. And the whole tenor has changed in our relationship. And we also do this at happy times. At the end of the day, almost every day, we'll just appreciate 3 things about each other. We've been doing this for 3 decades now. And it's such a sweet practice. But I'm calling out that shifting from an attitude of scarcity or crankiness or resentment to an attitude of gratitude or love or connection, it changes things. It doesn't just make things look better. It actually makes them better. Like, you literally have a better relationship when there's more gratitude and love flowing. And that makes conflicts dissolve. That makes it possible to collaborate on solutions in ways that were not available just a minute earlier.
There's an energy that you're creating at any moment, right? And you're either putting out like this anger and sort of negative energy, or you're putting out this love and positive energy.
Yeah.
And that changes the trajectory. Like the experience will unfold completely differently. And it's like Newton's law, third law, like every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. So if I'm like defensive with my wife, like her defenses will start to come up, and like and the minute that one of us shifts, and I love this practice, Ocean, I think maybe I'll have to take this. The minute one of us shifts, because this is what it sounds like, it helps you shift in the moment when you guys are like maybe even upset at each other, especially when you're upset at each other. Then the other person softens like right away. It's almost like an expected outcome. There's no other way.
Yeah, exactly.
So I got a question, Ocean. So I know that your father and mother chose a different path. When you were born, they moved away. How much does that experience? And you just gave a great example, but are there any other examples of your upbringing that you reflect on today as a CEO of a company? Like, how much of that experience as a young person living out in the middle of, the forest, how much does that influence your decision making as a CEO today?
Quite a bit. I mean, for a little backstory, for those who don't know, my grandpa founded Baskin Robbins ice cream company, and my dad, John, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in the backyard and 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer. And he was groomed to one day join in running the family business. But when he was in his early 20s, he was offered that chance, and he said no. And he walked away from a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to, as we jokingly put it, follow his own rocky road. And, my grandpa was pissed. He'd spent his life building a company that he was proud of. He wanted to share it with his only son. His son walked away from his biggest achievement. And my grandpa sold the company to United Fruit Company, and they took it in some directions he didn't like at all. Much more cutthroat business, made it bigger, made a lot more money, but at real cost to product integrity and also franchise success rate. Under my grandpa's leadership, every franchise owner made money and succeeded. That was no longer the case after he sold the company, and he was very bitter about that. And he blamed my dad for it, because if my dad hadn't walked away, then it would have stayed in the family and it would have been a different outcome. But that's what happened. And then as luck would have it, my grandpa wound up diagnosed with serious health issues, diabetes and heart disease and weight problems. And then his doctors gave him a copy of my dad's book and told him to read it. My dad had written Diet for a New America in 1987, which became a runaway bestseller. And my grandpa read the book and followed its advice and wound up reversing his his diabetes and his heart disease, losing a bunch of weight. His favorite part was that his golf game improved 7 strokes. My favorite part was that he lived 19 more healthy years. And we had some real healing in our family. You know, it wasn't perfect. My grandpa and dad still had radically different views on a lot of things, but there was love there. We learned that blood is thicker than ice cream. And it was a beautiful experience. And I was shaped by, you know, honestly, I was impressed by my grandpa's business achievements. I think that opened a world for me that it's possible to do big things. I was impressed by my dad's choice for integrity. You know, he walked away from the family company. He really embodied the choice that some things are more important in life than money. And, you know, we live in a society where in some ways we worship the God of money more than life itself. You know, we've made money more important than our families, than integrity, than the survival of life on earth in some cases. And yet here was my dad walking away from a life of immense wealth to choose a very different path. And so I grew up really knowing in my bones that some things are more important than money, you know, like health, like love, like integrity. And so that shaped me, you know, in profound ways. And then now I'm seeking to live my own conscience and values as best I can, you know, in this world of ours, and building Food Revolution Network as a B Corp, as a social enterprise that's embedded in a mission of creating positive impact in the world. And it's also looking at, can we make money doing good things, you know? Because I believe that if the only people with wealth are selfish and, you know, heartless, then we will not have a very bright future for humanity. So can we actually use a capitalist system to offer value to people's lives and create businesses of integrity, you know, that serve humanity in the world? That's my question, you know, and I think we've proven that at least it's possible, you know, like, you know, imperfectly like we all are, but it's possible. And I'm very grateful for that. I will say, when I started Food Revolution Network, you know, I started it with my dad, and, you know, at that time, he'd never actually run a business. You know, he was an best-selling author. He'd done speaking tours. But he'd grown up in the Baskin Robbins family, and, you know, he became, we were curious how sort of power dynamics would work in our company. Cause, you know, he was my dad after all. Like, how often does that go smoothly, you know? But we got really clear, like, I was the CEO and he actually worked for me, you know, in the business. And yet I was wanting to build on his legacy and had profound respect for his message and work in the world. And so we had this beautiful kind of synergy, and I always felt incredibly respected by him. He appreciated my work tremendously, and he also let me run the business, you know, never interfered, only supported and asked how he could help. He was a wonderful sounding board. And I think it's interesting that his first employer was his father and his last employer was his son, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's super cool. It's almost like a great hybrid, right?
Yeah. Right towards the end, I told him, I said, I know why your dad was so mad that you left the company. You are a great employee.
That's right. But he didn't want to be in leadership, so he had to find
not in that way. You know, he didn't have the temperament to deal with IRS reporting or like personnel issues, HR issues, you know, like he was a quick start. He liked to follow his own star. And, you know, a lot of building a company is actually learning to create rules that make sense and then follow them, you know, and that structure, you know, and that can be a double-edged sword. There's the old saying, you know, God said this is good. The devil said, yes, let's make it into an institution. You know? So sometimes we create structures and then they create us, you know, but that's why I think any institution should have the ability to constantly evolve in real time in response to feedback and keep getting better, hopefully.
I want to actually pin on that on food in particular. I've heard you say every bite is a vote. And as an observer, it looks like you have a relationship with food that's both personal and joyful, but also something that's political and purposeful. And I'm wondering, how do you hold both the joy and the fight without maybe burning out?
Yeah, I mean, our food choices have immense power. And in a world where it can be so easy to feel hopeless and despairing and powerless, I think that anything we can do to find places where we truly have the ability to influence the course of events in our lives and in our world is a place to pay a lot of attention. Every bite we take is shaping our destiny. And, we have turned food in the modern world into more of a commodity and a convenience for short-term pleasure, uh, than a source of genuine nourishment, than a medicine, than a choice for integrity. And, you know, in many ways, I don't think a lot of people are really the author of their food lives today. We're eating what we've been socialized to eat, what's convenient, and what we're addicted to. Um, but when we can break free from compulsive eating and food addiction and actually look at our food choices as a stand for integrity, we realize there is infinitely more pleasure in clean food eaten with conscience that nourishes our bodies and ourselves than there is in food that's jacked up on sugar and sodium and unhealthy fats that is loaded in calories and depleted of nutrients, or food that is the product of torture of animals in factory farms. I think that what we're learning today is that food really does have the power to shape our destiny individually and collectively. And so a few facts here. I focus a lot on, how we can eat more plant-based food. And I want to say why. Like, from a health perspective, you get dramatic benefit by eating less processed junk, right? Less sugar, less refined carbs, less unhealthy fats and trans fats, and less saturated fat as well, right? You get tremendous benefit when you eat more vegetables. No argument here. More fiber, more legumes, more whole grains. Like, these are the foods that are linked in study after study with longevity and better health outcome, right? But you could choose to eat, a more paleo-ish diet, and I believe generate similar health outcomes to a whole foods plant-based diet. Now, some people will argue with me about that, but I think the reality is getting away from the sugar and the processed junk is key, and whether you replace donuts with, grass-fed animal products or grains and beans and, and vegetables, you're gonna get some benefit, right? And just by making those changes. However, from a ethical and sustainability perspective, we've got to eat less animal products. Here's why. The collective mammalian biomass on Earth is 34% human body weight of all mammalian bodies. A third is human bodies. 62% is our livestock. 4% is all wild things on Earth. All of the zebras and giraffes and deer and wildebeest and caribou and wild horses and all the wild animals on Earth, 4%. So what we're doing is we're eating them out of house and home. We're destroying rainforests, ecosystems, wild grasslands, turning them into grazing land for livestock and land on which we grow grain and soy to feed to our livestock in factory farms. And in the process, we're destroying biodiversity, we're extinguishing species, we're destroying the future of life on Earth for generations to come. And so part of my purpose in life is I want to bring that 62% down so we can bring that 4% up. And it is cause and effect. Of all the agricultural land on Earth, 83% is being used for livestock production to produce 18% of the world's calories. If just theoretically the whole world went vegan tomorrow, I'm not saying we can or should, but we'd instantly free up an area of land equivalent to the entirety of the European Union, Australia, China, and the United States combined. That's how much land would be freed up that could be rewilded, that could go back to wilderness, in some cases tropical rainforest. It could sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. It could purify our air. It could create habitat for endangered species. It could give future generations the wilderness that they deserve, that will fill them with awe and wonder. If we don't change our course, we will continue, as human populations grow, to defile ever more of the Earth's natural resource space and give ourselves even less of a fighting chance of a viable future for humanity. So to me, eating lower on the food chain is powerful. And the simple laws of physics are that when you move up the food chain, you get inefficiency. It's like a protein factory in reverse. Whether the calories fed to livestock are coming from grass or from corn or soy, it's massively inefficient because most of what they eat doesn't turn into meat or dairy or eggs. It turns into hoof and hide and bones and manure and body heat the animal uses to move around, sometimes even into flatulence, which contributes to climate change. All of these things are happening. And when we eat lower on the food chain, we cut out the middle cow and we actually can save enormous resources. And so, grass-fed, pasture-raised may be healthier for human health. Maybe. We don't actually have a lot of research to say for sure, but we have reason to think that could be true. And it's definitely kinder to the animals, which I think is a big deal. But from an environmental standpoint, it's still profoundly unsustainable because the animals take longer to reach mature weight and they don't get as heavy. And so they're spending more time, in the case of cows, belching methane into the atmosphere. And they also need more total feed and they don't get as fat. So, from an environmental perspective, it's actually quite unsustainable. Now, there are ecosystems where grazing livestock can make sense sustainably. It's just small scale, not on the massive volume. So we've got to eat way less meat, dairy, and eggs if we're going to create a viable future for humanity. And then from an ethical perspective, let's remember this: 98% of the meat, dairy, and eggs consumed in the industrialized world are coming from factory farms, from animals that were essentially tortured. They may have never seen the sun or a blade of grass in their entire lives. They lived in abject misery. Many of them could not move. And they're standing in manure all day long. This is not how God intended it. If you're a person of faith, this is not what Creator wanted for us to be stewards of the earth. I am sure of that. And so if you're a human of conscience, you don't have to be a vegetarian or an animal rights person to say, no, I don't want to participate in that system. And yeah, sure, hunting is far more kind. The animals live a good life, but how many of them are there? 4% of all the mammalian biomass on Earth is all the wild things. We can't hunt for all of our meat. So small scale, a person here or there, that's more ethical. It's definitely more sustainable. There's still murder involved. Some people find that deeply problematic. Others don't. But I'm not talking here about whether or not it's okay to kill animals. I'm talking about the way we treat them while they're alive, the impact that has on our planet, and of course, the impact that has on our health. Put all that together, and to me, eating a more whole foods, plant-based diet is a powerful act of integrity for those of us with a conscience, who want our kids to have a viable future, who want animals to be treated with decency, and yes, who want to optimize our health and longevity along the way.
Wow.
Well, I appreciate that. I sense the passion in your movement, Ocean. And I a lot of times I like to reflect on like my own personal history in terms of like some of the decisions that my family forefathers have made, and the amount of courage that it took for them to get to a certain point in life. And I really am curious to like, when you reflect on your father and even his father, the amount of courage that, as you pursue your passion now, and even in sharing that, to me, I always reflect on the people of the past and the decisions that they made. How would you say, like, in your pursuit in making change on Earth, could you describe any moments where the courage that it takes to stand in front of, a group of people, essentially sharing your passion about change? How can you reflect on moments of like in your life where you're like, man, if my dad and his father, even growing a business, and your dad making a decision to step away, do you have moments like that in your life where you kind of like draw from like, man, that was a really like pinnacle moment, where I had to like, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's like in a boardroom or, or even something small, like.
To be super honest with you, and this is getting more personal, but, some of the biggest moments for me were challenging some of my dad's choices when I felt that he wasn't in integrity with the values I was raised with. Like he was making choices that I thought were having a negative impact on his grandkids, my sons. I have identical twin sons. Moments when I felt like, because they're on the autism spectrum, and I've been learning a lot about loving them unconditionally. And there were moments when I felt like his bias against neurodivergence, his fear for their future, had him seeing them through a lens of pathology, like that they were broken, and how sad it is. You're doing an amazing job being a father to these broken children. And I was like, no, they're not broken. They're different and they're wonderful. And they deserve complete and total love and respect as they are. And yeah, they'll probably, I don't know, they'll probably never like have a big job, and they're going to live different lives than we would have wanted. Sure, if I could have them be more functional in the eyes of the world, I'd love that. But they are two of the most emotionally intelligent, empathic humans I've ever known. They have incredible joy. Everybody around them loves them and is enriched for spending time with them. Like, they're incredible human beings. And I wanted to, push my dad to not pathologize them, to see them in their greatness, which I think is part of the responsibility of every parent and every grandparent. And he struggled with that. And so challenging that, and challenging the ways that his, in my view, narrow-sightedness had impact on them, like, was at times confrontational in nature. And I had to face moments when I was like, wow, if things don't go well here, like, we could stop working together, and then that could destroy our business and so much that we've built. And I also knew that my dad taught me some things are more important in life than money or reputation. Conscience, values, integrity, love matter. And so, somewhat inspired by that, we had some tough conversations along the way, including also other areas where I felt like his impact wasn't fully aligned with his values, and he wasn't fully being accountable for that. And we had tough conversations. And I think in the end, he did an incredible job, working with that and making amends for places where he'd had impacts that weren't his desire, and cleaning up what he could in his life, which wasn't everything, but it was a lot, so it's interesting though, because even through that, he was an example to me of moral fiber. And also, I think, Buckminster Fuller said, children are elders in universe time. They're born into a world more evolved than we can even imagine, and we can only glimpse it through their eyes. And, I've had this sense sometimes that my dad kind of blazed a trail through the bramble and bushes and got scratched up along the way. And then I come along and walk that trail and pave it and make it real nice and smooth. And, I couldn't have done that. It makes it easier because I was loved, because I had a moral compass in my childhood that I could learn from. And things were certainly imperfect and painful at times, but there was a moral compass, there were values, there was integrity that I could latch onto and grow from. And my dad forged that the hard way, and I'm grateful for that, and I know that he's cheering me on, from wherever he is now, every step I take towards freedom.
I have a follow-up question to that. How important is making amends in your life that you've experienced with your father? What would you say the importance and how pertinent it is while you're alive to make amends?
I think it's pretty important. I mean, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about the fearless moral inventory, like to truly own it all, right? And that doesn't mean you wallow in shame and guilt. It means you're accountable. And, of course, the best path to esteem is to do esteemable things, right? But sometimes we've caused harm, and, I take it as a given that we all did the best we could with what we knew along the way, right? So we can all have tremendous compassion for ourselves. And if we reacted from a triggered place and did things that were harmful, even systematically over years and decades, like, it's never too late to say, oh my gosh, I see better now. Now that I know better, I can do better. And I'm sorry. My dad made friends with the words, please, thank you, and I'm sorry in his later years. He was a feisty man along the way, and he was bold and courageous and belligerent and really convincing. He won a lot of arguments. He was a debate champion in high school, and you didn't want to argue with him, get in an argument with him, But later in life, he made friends with please, as he made humble requests for help, which he needed. He couldn't be the provider and caretaker for everybody anymore. Thank you. He expressed so much gratitude for his family and his loved ones. And also, I'm sorry. He truly expressing his regrets and his apologies many times over, especially to many of us closest to him. And that was profound for me. I think that it causes me to really look at my impact and choices. And of course, so many times when people say, when they're challenged with negative impact, they say, I didn't mean to. Oh, who cares, right? Like, of course, I take that as a given. I mean, of course, there are some people out there who did mean to, who actually wanted to hurt people, right? That happens in life. Even then, I believe that underneath it all, there's a place where they think that's right or necessary for some greater purpose or reason, right? If you want to kill the bad guys, right? So of course you want to hurt them along the way if you can't kill them, right? So there's that place a lot of us have, and then we learn over time, maybe to become a little wiser, to become a little kinder, and to see the impact of our actions. And if any of us have caused harm, and let's admit it, we all have, like, how can we hold that with kindness and compassion towards ourselves, which I think can enable us to make amends. And here's one of the things I really have come to believe is that we can't truly be accountable for our impact unless we're willing to love ourselves all the way through. Because if accountability equals shame or guilt, then a part of us will always feel defensive because it feels like we risk annihilation if we truly own negative impacts. But if we can have true compassion for ourselves all the way through, then it's so much easier to say, I'm sorry, and know that I'm not the action I took.
Yeah.
I'm something bigger than that, and kinder than that, and better than that. And when we really know that of ourselves, we're actually coming from a place of dignity. As long as you're defending your wrong conduct, you don't have dignity. You got defensiveness, you got ego, you don't have dignity, But if you're bigger than that and better than that, then you can own it all. You can accept yourself with unconditional love, and you can also say, yeah, I caused harm. I think that is how, forgive me for getting overly metaphysical, but I think that's how God sees us. I think that God or creator or whatever, like those who love us most, if you prefer, like they see us as unconditionally loved and accepted. And from that place, like the sun shines on everybody. It doesn't care what you did last night. Doesn't care who you harmed. The sun's still going to shine on you. It's still going to love you. Life's still the birds are still going to sing to you. And I think that the creator loves us unconditionally. And if we're willing to open to that, maybe allow it to teach us how to love ourselves unconditionally, then there's room for genuine healing, genuine remorse, genuine accountability. And I think as we take that accountability, we become more whole people, and we can maybe participate in helping others to heal as well.
Wow. You talk so much about acceptance and surrendering, and so many people, I think, struggle. I think at the beginning you said that's why everyone suffers, because they're resisting what is. Like, how do you personally get into that state when you feel yourself resisting something? So many people would, just stay there.
Yeah. About 15 years ago, I was in Jordan, and I had been leading a gathering of young leaders from throughout the Middle East for a week. And they were folks from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, all over the region. And they included folks who literally could be killed for sitting in the same room with each other when they got back home. So we couldn't take pictures. We couldn't publish a roster of who was present at the gathering. But these were all people with enough courage to sit down and tell their stories and meet other humans across the divides and explore how we could build a better world together. And it wasn't all nice kumbaya. Like, there were some intense, painful moments shared. People had very different narratives of the Middle East and history, but there was a forging of common humanity. What I saw was that in that region of the world, which is the birthplace of 3 of the world's major religions, the land is practically soaked in sweat and labor. Just surviving there is hard. It's soaked in blood, so many wars, so much violence, so many genocides. It's also soaked in prayers. People are deeply faith-based. They value faith more than anything, more than money, honestly, which is not familiar to me in the United States, but they worship God more than money, And but it was also clear to me that the pain and suffering in that region went so deep. People would die for their values and their people and their culture. And some of these cultures, values, and peoples were diametrically opposed to each other. And so as I went on the last day, we went down to Ma'in Hot Springs on the edge of the Dead Sea. It's the lowest place on earth. And there's a hot springs waterfall with water you can barely stand up under. It's coming from deep in the earth. And it's the perfect hot springs temperature. I was standing under there being absolutely pummeled by this water. And I found myself weeping. And I felt the way that attachment brings suffering. And wanting the world to be different than it is creates so much pain and misery. And I found myself with this prayer that just was pouring out of me. Help me to release all ambition, all attachment, all desire for all that's not so. And I really meant it, every word of that. And I was asking for help. It wasn't like I'm clean and pure, but I was asking that those waters cleanse me and purify me and help me to release all ambition, all attachment, and all desire for all that isn't actually so. And then as I came out of the water, I was continuing to weep. And then the next piece came through me, which was help me to embrace totally with all that I am, all that is real. And as I felt that, I felt like I'm in wanting to embrace everything that is real with all that I am, which includes war, violence, child abuse, starvation, misery, genocide. This is real. And, when you're sick, your white blood cells have got to embrace and get to know the virus, right? You can't develop antibodies till you've gotten to know what's up. And you only get to know what's up by actually facing it, confronting it, and getting to know it, right?
Yeah.
And so, arguing the world should be different doesn't change it. Making it wrong doesn't actually make things any better. So how do we embrace reality, which includes, by the way, our fierce desire to make things better, to change things? The part of us that says, hell no, not on my watch. I don't want to be a part of this. I want to be an activist. I want to change things. That's part of what's so, right? And so that's just lived in me as a prayer that I come back to every day of my life for the last decade and a half. And I keep asking, where am I holding about ambition, attachment, or desire for things that are not actually so? And how do I embrace what is? And it's made me a better dad. It's made me a better activist. Martin Luther King said, you have no moral authority with those who can feel your underlying contempt. When we judge and pathologize people, we lose moral standing in our relationship to them. And so I want to embrace my children, even when they're miserable and suicidal. I love them. And they're God's children too. And I want to embrace them as they are. And I think that it's only when we truly love things, they become kinder and gentler and better, including the scared parts of us, the traumatized parts of us. Love just tends to make things better, not because we're trying to forcibly change it, but because it's like the sunshine that lets the flowers open in the morning, that, and that's what love is, I think. So I come back to that and I ask, how can I love the world? And, that doesn't mean that I'm okay. I'm okay with being not okay with a lot of things, right? That's okay too. And there are things in the world that I think absolutely must make angels weep. And yet I want to somehow find a way that I'm okay with that and my capacity to respond to it.
Ocean, the world feels so heavy, and to your point, getting acclimated with all the issues and problems. I look at things like the carnivore diet, which is increasing in popularity. Oftentimes it feels like, I don't know if I want to use this word, but we're losing, and we're certainly losing time. And I wonder what gives you hope.
Well, nothing can stop us from the law of cause and effect, right? So everything we do eventually is going to create feedback loops for us, for our species as well. As collectively, one of the things that scares me the most is that we're making choices that won't be felt for a while. Like with climate change, for example, it could take a generation or two for us to see the impacts of our actions. And there are things in life that you can reverse, but there are some things where you don't get any do-overs. And once the polar ice caps are melted, then the sea levels have rise by 15 feet. There's no going back on that, really. I mean, maybe we could eventually refreeze the ice caps, but it's going to take a very, very, very long time to build up, all that ice again, And so I think there are things that we're doing that have a long tail, and that is deeply concerning to me. But I also believe that we are resourceful creatures, and that when faced with crisis, we have incredible capacity to respond with ingenuity and creativity. And our ancestors have shown us that, because the mathematical odds of any of us being alive today are infinitesimally small. We come from an unbroken chain of ancestors who lived long enough to reproduce at a time when most of their siblings did not, and yet unbroken chain, right? All the way back. Our ancestors made it that far, at least, right? And there's incredible courage and tenacity in that, and we inherit that, So to me, that gives me a sense of hope, and yeah, absolutely. Like as a person who's committed to supporting a lighter human footprint on the earth, I want us to eat lower on the food chain. So when I see meat consumption rising, and dietary guidelines potentially being released as we're speaking now soon, that may appear to pretend to exonerate saturated fat, and maybe even sodium, I of course feel concerned about what can feel like a backslide. But I also believe that humans will find their way, and if we need to get sicker, if we need to kill more animals, if we need to destroy more ecosystems along the way, eventually we'll feel the impact of our choices, or our children will, or our grandchildren will. And as a species, I think we can evolve, learn and grow in response. So I believe that. And at the same time, I wish we could do it with less suffering, and I hate the thought that our kids and grandkids are going to bear the brunt of the choices we're making today. And I hate to see people, creating more sickness for themselves. And I know that even there, if we die prematurely, it's our loved ones that will care for us, and then will grieve us. Maybe we're free, maybe we go to a beautiful place. Hopefully we're off to heaven, but what's left behind? And if we can take care of our bodies, maybe we'll be around for our loved ones. And so all the fad diets and short-term weight loss hacks, it does scare me. I also know that it doesn't tend to stick. We see all these Atkins and keto and now carnivore, these trends swing, and then people realize, oh my gosh, I feel gross, it's not working anymore, and then they stop. Unfortunately, a lot of times they stop, and then they go swing back to ultra-processed food, which makes things even worse. A lot of the studies showing saturated fats apparently exonerated have been comparing it to ultra-processed junk food. Yeah, I actually believe that saturated fat is probably healthier than refined carbs for most people, but that doesn't make it a health food. Not compared to healthy fats and whole grain carbs, and so I think instead of what is the nutritional part of the equation, we've got to consider. And even with carnivore diet, a lot of people are getting off of all the donuts and Doritos and French fries and junk food, and that's going to create some health benefits, and it's going to bring down inflammation in the body, even though long term you're setting yourself up for massive nutrient deficiencies and health problems. And a diet that's devoid of fiber, which is critical to the microbiome health and our capacity to be well and mentally healthy as well. So, it does concern me. And I also trust that, people are going to experience the result of their choices, and they'll hopefully keep learning.
A movement like yours is one thing also that gives me hope. Like to see, I believe, love is maybe 10-fold or 100-fold as powerful, maybe 1,000-fold as powerful as the negative emotions. And so you have this like message of and emanate this energy of love. I feel like it gets amplified many, many, many times over. And the ways we can't, when you just look at the numbers, like, yes, meat consumption's going up, but there's also behind the scenes this sort of built up of love that maybe we can't appreciate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I don't think people ever, make lasting change out of shame or guilt, because we associate it with negative emotions, and then we wind up, part of us says, hey, I don't want to feel that way. It's terrible fuel. It can push us to make a change short term, but long term, we need to be fueled by love, I think, if we're going to have continuity. Pain pushes and vision pulls. As long as you're in intense suffering, you can make radical, bold changes. But as soon as you get out of pain, you'll stop being fueled and motivated, and then you'll slide back again unless you're pulled by vision. So I'm interested in both, of course. We need to face reality and feel our pain sometimes. But I also want us to have a vision. There's an old saying, a person with their health has got 1,000 dreams. A person without it's only got one dream, which is to get that health back, So I'm in the 1,000 dreams business.
Right.
I'm just a fly on the wall listening to Ocean's wisdom right now, man. I mean, I think everything that I wanted to ask, I'm sort of just taking it all in.
Well,
yeah.
I hear, first of all, I want to just say, like, it's really incredible how open you are about the grief of losing your dad and the experience of it and everything you've learned. There's a beauty to that. And there's a beauty to you taking on and carrying his torch and continuing the work that you began together. And so I want to ask what legacy means to you now. And when you think about your own children, what kind of legacy do you hope you'll leave?
I mean, at the risk of sounding like a California hippie, it's all about love, man. I hope that, that we can bring a little more love into this world, or maybe a lot more. And how does love show up? Sometimes love shows up through protesting in the streets. Sometimes it shows up through what we eat. Sometimes it shows up through being kind to each other or being kind to ourselves. I think it's very difficult to give something you aren't getting, which is to say, but it doesn't mean you have to get love from somebody else. It means you've got to turn that love inward as well as outward. And I think that creates positive feedback loops. I also believe in the value of service. My dad told me when I was very young, those people are most happy in life who have learned to find joy in serving other people. And I think that's true. I think we all have a deep need to feel like our lives matter to something more than our own short-term survival. Got to help somebody else, and that changes your relationship to pain, by the way, because in my experience, when I'm facing someone's pain, my heart is either going to get bigger or smaller. There's no in between. It's either going to get smaller and shrink away. It's too much. I don't want to face it. I don't want to feel it. It just hurts. Or it's going to get bigger and say, oh, wow, I can hold this. I can love this, even though I'm going to suffer more because of that. And being willing to feel that pain and let our hearts expand is part of what can mobilize us into action, positive, constructive action. For example, as we're recording this interview right now, there's a lot of people hungry and starving and in pain in Gaza right now. A lot of conversations about who's at fault and what should be done, and all the things, right? But whether you believe in Zionism or genocide or whatever you think, there are human beings who have no part in terrorism or violence, little kids who are scared, hungry, and hurting right now, who are not responsible for any of that stuff, and they deserve our love, right? And I believe that if they feel loved by humanity, maybe they'll be less likely to be terrorists too, by the way, later in life. But regardless of what you think about politics and policy, they deserve love. And, I've had plenty of angst about that because I have lots of Palestinian friends, but I also haven't wanted to get involved in the politics of it, which are so divisive and complicated. But I care about people, So recently I, found about some people I trust who are connected to people on the ground who are helping. Like, there's somebody who started a program where she's, reading stories to children in Gaza. she's got a tent and there's hundreds of kids coming and they need to like raise money to buy a bigger tent so they can have more kids come for story time. And I just thought, like, what's not to love about that? And they're not reading stories, by the way, about terrorism and the Intifada. They're reading stories about love and kindness and helping these kids have a childhood, and so of course I wanted to support that and spread the word on Facebook. And I took that little action, sent a donation, posted about it, and felt a little kinder and happier in my heart. And the reason I'm telling this story is not because I'm some moral high ground person. It's because I felt what it means to us to do something good, right? There are so many problems in the world that are unconfrontable and overwhelming, and you can't solve them all, but can you take a little step? Can you do a little something? Helen Keller said, I'm only one person. I can't do everything, but just because I can't do everything does not mean I will refuse to do that which I can. And I think the value of doing what you can is, yes, it helps humanity evolve, and the more of us that do that we can, the more the world becomes better. But I'm just going to say selfishly, you'll be happier. You'll sleep better at night. You'll feel better about who you are as a human being when you know that you're on the right side of history about matters of moral value and significance. And so each of us has to find what that is for us, and who we are in that, and how we can help. And so that's the legacy I hope to leave, love and service, and then along the way, sure, there are nuances. How do we challenge the status quo? How do we think critically? How do we ask the big questions? How do we have moral fiber in times of significance? What does that mean? But at forgiveness, respect for sovereignty, there are so many nuances. But I think at a really basic level, love and service just covers so much.
Wow.
I just had a question for you, Ocean. And you were talking about acceptance of what is, right? How do you protect it? Do you have a way of protecting the love that you want to share with people, the service? How do you protect that moral fiber? Or do you have to? Or is your mindset nah, it's always abundance. So regardless of, but I'm in a place in my life where I want to protect the peace that I have within, right? Do you have that mindset in it? Or is it, you don't believe that you have to protect something that you want to give away?
My dad's last advice to me before he died was, he said, put your own sanity first. And, he said, the more kind of insane the world becomes, the more critically important that is. You can't give something you don't nurture in yourself. And so there are moments when I stop working, even when I could do more, because I can feel that my moral sanity, my health, my well-being depends on putting that first, And some of us can give so much to others that we lose ourselves, And I believe that if we do that for long enough, we won't have much to give eventually. So that sense of putting your own oxygen mask on first, it's very practical. If a plane's out of oxygen, you will not be able to help other people if you are dying, And so, we kind of have to find our own way to live into that on a daily basis, with how we nurture sleep, exercise, healthy food, loving relationships, self-care practices. And, so those are big things, right? But I'll take it another step deeper. My sanity depends on my conscience also. It depends on my being in right relation with those around me. If my child was, fell and broke their arm, it would be no act of putting my sanity first to walk away because I haven't finished my bath yet.
Right.
I need to finish my 20-minute meditation practice right now. I'm going to pick up my kid and take him to the hospital.
Right.
My sanity demands sometimes that I take action. And so sometimes our sanity also means being honest and reckoning. Where am I out of integrity with my values? Not as a form of self-beratement. We're going to make trade-off choices. There are nuances to all of it. But being willing to feel those questions with an open heart can help us feel more whole, more free, and more alive.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, while you mentioned self-care, that's sort of how we like to end the conversation is like, Ocean, how do you turn your own life into a health feast, into a life that is healthful, but also joyous and abundant and communal?
I'm a big fan of joy, I have to say. Healthy joy, not the joy that maybe comes from getting drunk at a party, though if that's your thing, I'm not going to judge you. But for me personally, I'm interested in the joy that comes from healthy habits, playing racquetball, and pouring sweat, jumping in the ocean when it's chilly and cold, dancing, like, dancing my heart out to a groove that just gets me going, sharing beautiful time with my beloved, like nurturing quality time for not just for rigor. There are some things you do because they're good and they're not pleasant. And there's some things you do because they just feel good. I think it's all welcome, but I'm interested in finding joy in things that are also going to make things better long term, So fitness and vitality. I love pleasurable, healthy food, food that I will enjoy, that makes me salivate, that makes me want to chew it more, that I can look forward to, that's also super good for me. Like those are win-win-wins, right? So I'm a big fan of joy and healthy pleasures that come from healthy choices. And I think there are lots of those to be found. In fact, I think some of the best things in life are free. It's an old saying, but it's true. Love doesn't cost a penny. Going for a hike doesn't cost a penny. Doing meditation doesn't cost a penny. Eating healthy food doesn't have to cost much either, by the way. So let's nurture those healthy habits and healthy choices that build healthy lives. And let's take as much pleasure, joy, and, delight as possible in it.
Awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Ocean, this was just such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I just want to thank you again for making the time and being here with us today.
Thank you for asking some profound questions. This may be one of the more unique interviews I've ever done.
Yeah, thank you for spending the time with us, man. I kind of like the fact that we just went into the veggies and potatoes. You know what I mean? We just wanted to know, because we knew, we've heard, your talks, and we just wanted to just get to the veggies. You know what I
mean? Well done.
All right, Ocean, we do, of course, I think we'll put this in our show notes, but people know how to find you, but Food Revolution Network, of course. And you're on social media. Food Revolution Network is on social media.
Yeah.
So we can find you there. And Ocean, we do a requisite fist bump to the camera. So all three of us. All right. Awesome. Awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And we will see you back here next time. Until then, live well and rock on.